So what do you think of that title? It's pretty wordy, but the great and secret knowledge.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, I'm not afraid of a wordy title, though, so I might not be the best judge on whether it's too wordy, because I tend to like titles that are a mouthful.
Well, that one certainly is. You're listening to The Great and Secret Knowledge, a speculative fiction podcast. So, how should we start? Do you remember how we started it last time?
We started it in a very sort of meandering, inelegant way because we didn't know what we were doing yet, and it appears we still do not. We're not snapping into a format, so...
That's right. We're freewheeling it.
We're just wandering around the halls. We're not doing any meticulous tracking of which hall we're in.
Ah, yes. It's early on in the process. We don't even call it the show yet. Capitals. Mm-hmm. Welcome, folks. We have a title, probably. It's The Great and Secret Knowledge, a speculative fiction podcast. Mm-hmm. Brought to you by Lindsey and Jeff. Can you fit all that on the poster?
Yeah, that it'll just be initialized on the posters and the t-shirts, and then you can feel cool for knowing what it means,
I love that. Mm-hmm. A SFP.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could be so many things. But you know what it means. The strange and secret knowledge.
Yes. Yeah, I guess that's the part you'd initialize. A speculative fiction podcast. It's supplementary. So TGASK. Tagask.
Tagask.
Welcome to Tagask, everybody. I'm Jeff.
Oh, I love it. It sounds like a comic book noise exclamation. Mm-hmm. Kapow. Tagask.
Okay, so in episode 1, you learned about us and our approach to talking about books and movies and stuff, and we moved on to the first part of Piranesi. Mm-hmm. My notes. Oh, I'll just look at the Audible. Part 1, Piranesi, and about half of part 2, the other. And that brings us to... on my thing, page 44, a conversation. I have a quote here. It has occurred to me that there may be more wisdom in birds than appears at first sight, a wisdom that reveals itself only obliquely and intermittently. So he chats with birds.
He chats with birds. I like this bird decoding thing that he thought. The birds landed on 2 statues, a gardener and the beekeeper, who he thought, that indicated industry. So he fished a lot and he didn't throw any fish back. And then the tides were weird and the weather was weird. It wasn't the tides, it was the weather was too foggy to fish. So if he hadn't listened to the birds and caught more fish than he usually would have, he wouldn't have had anything to eat for a couple of days. So that was his first, maybe the birds are here to help me out.
Yeah. Yeah, so we knew that he ascribed, certain values to statues. Mm-hmm. And now he's applying that wisdom, I guess, to whatever the birds are doing. I
mean, he's very dogmatic about his interpretations of the statues, for sure. He acts because when he tries to listen to the birds a second time and they land on multiple statues and he's, putting together, a sentence from it, he's like, well, this one's a child smelling a flower, so that clearly means innocence. And I'm like, does it clearly mean innocence? I mean, that's definitely one of the interpretations, but I don't know that it unarguably means that,
I mean, it kind of depends on the flower,
Yeah.
What if it's a Gerber daisy? Is that different from a rose? I don't know.
Probably. Flowers do have cultural connotations, and there used to be a whole language of the flowers, where all the
Ooh.
flowers meant different things. So back in like the 17 and 1800s, you'd send messages to people with a bouquet of flowers, and all the different flowers would have different meanings. And so you could send messages to like lovers or friends through a bouquet of flowers.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
All I know is
love
you
all
don't
the
give
weird-
roses to a non-romantic friend.
Yes, one of the only meanings we've hung on to is that roses are romantic explicitly,
Yeah.
so particularly red roses. But you could
Yeah,
send...
I was gonna say that, but then I wasn't sure. Like, what if I was wrong? Like an orange rose, is that for like?
Yeah, I mean, like
bros?
you could give orange rose for bros. Yeah, I mean, I think that red roses are the ones that we interpret as specifically romantic. Like if you gave a coworker a bouquet of yellow roses on their birthday, I don't think that would necessarily be interpreted as romantic.
Cool. All right, I got to learn this language.
Yeah, I just love the idea that you could send somebody a bouquet of flowers that meant like, I hate you, don't ever talk to me again.
Is that black?
No, it was specific, like, it's like bougainvilleas or something. So, every flower means a different thing, and so you put them together and it's a sentence. So one means like, I hate you, and one means like, you know, passionately. So it's an emphasizer for anything else that you put. So if you put an I hate you flower and the emphasizer flower, then that means like, I loathe you, and stuff like that.
Oh, no.
But, I mean, you can say good things. Obviously, it's flowers. There's a lot of good things you could say with them. The language is mostly, but I just loved the idea. It's just like the height of some kind of passive aggression to send somebody a bouquet that means like, you suck, I don't like you.
Yeah, I spent $100 to tell you to fuck yourself.
But that is not, you know, we got a little... He's interpreting the birds landing on different statues as a message.
Yeah.
And the second message he gets from them is that a message is coming some point in the
That's right.
future. Oblique knowledge. And that he's going to have to search for the meaning. Because they land on 3 sets of statues, 2 in each. And the first one is an angel in a ship. And he decides that that means a message coming from far away. And then, what are the...
I can pull up the text
Yeah, I was
here.
going to say, there's a cloud and something else, and that's the one that a book and a cloud. And that's obscured knowledge.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
Obscured knowledge. Which, like, that could be a cult, or that could be the others hiding something from him.
It just, a message, he interprets it as like a message where the information will not be readily apparent, that you have to, like, decipher it somehow.
Yeah. Oh, he talks about how it just didn't occur to him to ask the other for shoes. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yes, because after he comes to this bird conversation decision, he has another meeting with the other. And the other is trying to do a ritual that he's apparently done before, but tweaked some aspects of. And in this, he's decided to invoke somebody who has had some of the knowledge previously, a great king, whose name is Addy Domarus.
Yes, Addy Domarus.
Domarus? Okay. This is where listening to the audiobook helps, because you have the inside scoop on how to pronounce everything.
Yeah, he watches the other do a working. Addy Domarus, a king who grants information. And so Piranesi is like, is Addy Domarus one of the dead? Like one of the other people in the house? And the other's like, what the hell are you talking about? And he's like, the dead. Biscuit box, man. He starts rattling them off. And he's like, no, it's got nothing to do with that.
Found? Those bones? Those random...
Yes. Yeah. Those bones you found?
The other has gotten even more condescending in this section than in the previous section, and he was already pretty condescending.
Hell yes.
But yeah, no, he decides that the ritual to work needs to be directed at some source of power, and Piranesi suggests a star. And he's like, oh, that's great, but it should happen in a special room, and all the rooms here are the same. And he's like, all the rooms here are so different. What are you talking about? But then also there's this one room that's really different. And the other's like, oh, tell me about this room. What stars can you see from the one doorway and everything? And he's like, well, it's really far away. So we could go there, but it's like a 3-hour hike there and like a 3-hour hike back. And the other is immediately uninterested, but then sends Piranesi to do it. But then Piranesi's like, oh, but there's this room with all these broken statues. And he's like, so what? And he's like, well, I don't have any shoes. He's like, what happened to your shoes? And he's like, well, they fell apart and I was trying to construct new ones, but I haven't yet. And he's like, well, I'll give you some shoes, but you have to go check out this room and tell me what stars you can see from the doorway if I give you shoes. And he's like, yeah, absolutely. And so then he not only gets the shoes, which are in like a shoebox. They're like new shoes in a shoebox.
Yes, because his are like just made out of fish leather or something.
Yeah. He's tied around his feet with seaweed. And it's not working well. But then we get a list of all of the things that the other has given him and what years he gave them in. And the list is actually quite extensive of the, compared to the very meager possessions. So in the year named the Constellations, the other gave him a sleeping bag, a pillow, 2 blankets, 2 fishing nets made of synthetic polymer, 4 large sheets of heavy gauge plastic, a torch, I have never used this and cannot now remember where I put it, 6 boxes of matches, 2 bottles of multivitamins. Okay, let's stop for a second.
A torch, like super useful, doesn't even consider it.
Well, he talks about a little later how it very rarely ever actually gets dark in the house.
Oh.
Because he's like, there's always the sun and the moon and the stars. And he talked about there's only actually a couple of corners that are so shadowed as to be dark. So maybe the reason that he hasn't used a torch is it never really gets dark enough.
That's so interesting. Just I want to get more into that stuff, but I realized I have a note here. The thing about his shoes, not only he's not so much worried about discomfort of walking over debris, he doesn't want to get an infection.
Right. He's worried if he cuts his feet, he could get infected and he'd have no way to treat it.
He doesn't even know about antibiotics, and he doesn't ask the other for anything.
We don't know that he doesn't know about antibiotics because he says there's no way to treat it, so that would mean that he understands that infections are treatable, but just that he wouldn't be able to treat it. So we don't know whether he knows about antibiotics or not, if that's one of the things he remembers or not.
Amazing.
But he is worried about, he knows what an infection is, so.
Yes. Okay, so in the year I named the constellations the other gave me, so, okay, here we are. Did you get to, okay, in the year I counted and named the dead, he gave me a cheese and ham sandwich.
Yep, that was a low gift from the other year. Just got that one sandwich. But in the year that the ceiling in the 20th and 21st Northeastern halls collapsed, he got a bunch of stuff.
Hell yeah.
A very fascinating list, which again implies a lot of knowledge that he doesn't otherwise seem to have, because one of the objects is a slice of Christmas cake. Yes. Which implies that he knows what both cake and Christmas is. But it is 6 plastic bowls. There's a whole paragraph about the bowls and that the bright colored ones are good and the gray colored ones are not because they disappear when he puts them out to collect fresh water. 4 pairs of socks, which were very warm but now have holes worn through them. A fishing rod and line, an orange, a slice of Christmas cake, 8 bottles of multivitamins, and 4 boxes of matches.
Okay. So I could never forget Christmas or cake.
Pretty memorable things, both of them.
And again, his socks are all full of holes, and the other never even looks at his feet, clearly.
Well, and this guy, we're definitely getting the impression, is running around in, like, tatters of fish leather and, like, whatever. And this guy, the other, is wearing, like, a new suit every time we see him. He has shiny shoes, and he keeps describing the color of his suit and shirt every time, and they are different every time.
This guy comes twice a week, and in all that time, he's never bothered to like, hey, how are your socks doing?
Your clothes are deteriorating. Maybe we should give you some new ones, because I seem to have wild access to resources that you don't have. Because there's another couple of lists of things. And he kind of concludes with, like, why does the house give him so much and me so little? And he kind of concludes that the house knows that the other just isn't as capable as he is. Which would mean that the other would either die without these extra things, or, and this is, he thinks is more likely, that the house knows that he would have to take a lot more care of the other and wouldn't be free to do his other stuff if the house wasn't providing all this extra stuff for the other.
Okay, so now I want to stop the show for a second, talk about something super uncomfortable and sad. But when you grow up in a situation like this where you're kept in the dark, you have no control of like when you get stuff, you never ask for anything because you might not get it and then it'll be awkward.
Yeah.
Like, he's behaving like somebody that's been like long-term conditioned to be mistreated and like just accept it. I don't know if Clark is like trying to do something metaphorical here, if it's just a coincidence, but
I don't know, but he definitely does a lot of rationalizing and always putting the situation into a positive light.
Yes.
For sure. But definitely always never thinks it's presumptuous for him to mention stuff that he like has no shoes. Even when it's relevant to the conversation that they're having, he doesn't want to bring it up. And then the other is like, why didn't you just ask me for shoes? And he's like, well, I wouldn't think, like, I should just ask you for shoes. Like, why would I do that? Like, that's so yeah, he is somebody who definitely rationalizes and justifies whatever situation has been sort of thrust upon him. But in a surprisingly positive spin, like his whole thing about the house giving this guy so much more than it's giving him, he puts all down to the house being, like, beneficent. Like, it's all...
Do you think this guy was like that before the house took his memory?
I don't know. It's hard to say. We don't really have any indications of what his personality was like before, unless the pieces of the note are from him and not from the 16th person. Because remember, there were pages missing from his journals, and then later on in this section, he finds torn up pages, which indicate a very different personality if they're his. But there's also this 16th person running around, so...
Here's my theory, just from what we've read so far. He wrote something in one of those pages, I guess all of those pages, that disturbed him. Mm-hmm. Like, he didn't want to be like that anymore, so he just... You know, because it said kill him, I think, at some point. We'll get there.
Yeah.
The next section is, none of the dead claim the name Addy Domarus.
Yes, this way that he feels like the dead speak back to him, or like he doesn't say that they like talk, but he gets impressions back from them. He seems to imply.
Yes. As I knelt at each niche or plinth, I felt a faint sense of repudiation, as if the name were being pushed away. Yeah, that's fun. He's just so innocent.
Yeah.
But, like, this does remind me of people that I knew that were manic or delusional, like finding signs and everything. But
yes,
this is a fantasy book, so everything might have meaning. We don't know, you know?
Well, we don't know the details of the house, but from his perspective, there is definitely something supernatural going on about the house. Like, right? Like, this is not a normal environment if his descriptions of it are accurate. So, of all the places to look for and believe in signs, like the birds landing on different statues or trying to send you a message and whatever, this place would be a place where that makes more sense than not. But he does put a very optimistic spin on everything.
That's right. First, he has to get mad at himself for feeling cowardice. Does that ring a bell? Yeah.
So he's journeyed with his new shoes that are so bouncy, he's like skipping along because they feel so good. He makes the journey to the room that he was telling the other about, the room that's different, where it has no windows and only the one door, and it has a very different vibe, according to him, than any other room in the house. So he goes there, and then he gets kind of nervous because it's dark, and this is where he talks about that there isn't really any darkness in the house.
Yes.
There's only a couple spots, but this room because it's night by the time he gets there, is dark. Because it's only got the one door and no windows.
So his only thought is if he waits until night, he'll be able to see the night sky through the doorway.
Yes, and be able to see, but he has to stay all night to see every star, as that travels across the sky that's visible.
Picture of
right. Because if he only goes in there at one point, then he's just going to see whatever star is currently visible and not every star that's visible over the course of the night.
Yeah, so he's mad at himself. I became angry at myself, disgusted at my own timidity. This was no way to think. Had I walked for 4 hours to reach this hall only to be too afraid to go in? How ridiculous! Okay, now, this is silly, but you've seen the IT Crowd, right?
Yes.
Richard Ayoade,
mm-hmm.
Black dude, lots of hair.
Mm-hmm.
This is who I'm picturing during this rant. It's like...
You picturing Moss the character or Richard
Moss,
Ayoade?
Keep your stuff together. How ridiculous. But let's see. He has an obligation to the other. He needed to know what stars were visible from the door. It's like he feels everything really deeply.
Yes, yeah.
And like he wants to please.
He definitely wants to please. And also he did come all this way. Like he made this, so he now, to just turn around, he's not going to do that. So he does go in. And he sits down and he watches the doorway and he falls asleep. And when he wakes up, the room is bathed in moonlight. So he can see all of the statues in this room. And it is a crowd of people. Instead of like every other room where the statues are individual and on plinths, this room is a replication of a crowd of people interacting with each other, touching each other, like pressing around. And he gets this moment of feeling what it would be like if there were more than two people in the house.
Oh, yes. What it might be like if instead of two people in the world, there were thousands. Yeah, and this is where I got my sense that, like, the house isn't just bringing in statues that are sort of vaguely representative, that maybe they, in a sense, photograph entire rooms and bring them in. Like maybe this is a specific crowd.
Well, there's also the statues have alluded to stories and mythology a bunch. So if this is like a scene from a play or a scene in a story or a scene that happened somewhere, like you're saying, like a photograph of an event in some other world.
Yeah, the young man who stood bathed in the moonlight, elation in his face, a banner in his hand. What is a banner? What do you think? A hand banner, like a pennant
it
flag?
Could be like it's definitely usually would mean some sort of a flag, but it could be, there's no description of the kind of clothes that they're wearing or anything. So this could be like a medieval, carrying your colors onto the battlefield kind of banner, or this could be like a protest march kind of banner, or this could be a little pennant that you get at a
parade.
At a parade.
Or a baseball game. Now, he interprets it as they're looking at the moon, but they might be looking at something totally different.
Who knows? Yeah, we have no idea.
He had this great line: the insignificance of the knowledge came in the form of a revelation. This realization, let's see. Oh, this is where he realizes that he doesn't want to do magic. He wants to do science.
He doesn't want to find the secret knowledge because he thinks the secret knowledge seems pointless. Because all of the things that the other talks about it being able to do, he doesn't see the point of. Why would he need to be invisible? From who? The birds?
Yeah.
To control weaker minds? As far as he knows, only two people in the world, and they're both strong, intelligent, lively minds, so neither of them could be qualified as a weaker mind. And even if he could control a weaker mind, why would he want to do that?
Yeah. Oh, man. Let's see. The house is valuable because it is the house. It's enough in and of itself. It is not the means to an end. Yeah, so the house is like the house is sacred, you wouldn't like go into the church and like yank out all the candlesticks or whatever.
Well, I mean, you can even definitely read this as a bigger metaphor of like, you know, strip mining or anything like that, right? Like the space itself is sacred. It has all the value that it would ever need. You don't need to create value out of it. You don't need to be able to extract something from it to make it worthwhile.
Yeah, I think as we go forward, because the other is the way he is, and Piranesi is has brown skin, I think there may be
a colonial metaphor.
Yeah, that some of that stuff might come up more, but I'm definitely seeing some of that here. Yeah, I mean, because you know, nuclear power has like changed our world, but like, how do we get it? By like yanking native people's rocks apart and then like whatever the process is to fortify the uranium puts out all sorts of toxic waste. Fortify is not the right word. I used to know all this stuff, but
you enrich uranium. Yeah.
So they take the U-235 from like people who should, their land should be sacred and protected. We just yank that away and then poison the rest of the earth. And then at the same time, we get big, terrible bombs out of it. Yeah. That sucks. Let's see. Herring gulls leave a bunch of paper on the ground.
Yeah, we don't know that they left it, but he finds it on the ground in a room with a bunch of herring gulls nesting.
Yes. Okay.
Like torn up scraps of paper. And he can't get all of it. He collects 47 pieces. And he reads little scraps. There's stuff about a minotaur. There's, like you mentioned earlier, it says, kill him.
Yeah, minotaur, slave, and kill him.
But he can't get all the scraps to put it together because there were 47 on the ground, but there are pieces in the nests. And the herring gulls are attacking him, obviously, if he goes to their nests, because, like, he was not going to let him take apart their nests and go after their babies. So he figures he has to come back in 6 months when they've abandoned the nests. And then he can come and get all the scraps of paper out of them and put it together. Then the patience this guy has is just astounding. He's like, mystery pages? Well, gonna have to figure this out in 6 months.
It really is the patience of a scientist. Like, it's funny because we like sci-fi and there's always, you know, those mad scientists who go really fast, and Doctor Who lashes some shit together. But really, science is like, takes time. Yeah.
Usually impatient scientists are not good scientists and don't tend to be good characters because, science requires a lot of patience and a lot of humility. Science requires an ability to fail and an understanding that all data is good data, even if it's negative data. Like, it all still helps you achieve your goals. But he also has the patience of, like, a monk, right? There's this sense that everything happens when it's supposed to happen. And if he can't read the paper now, that's fine. He'll come back in 6 months when the gulls don't need the nests anymore and he can get all the scraps of paper.
That's great. And he respects the birds.
Yeah. He doesn't feel like he has the right to violate their homes even if he wanted to get pecked to death. Whereas you can definitely imagine somebody like the other in this situation, it would have gone very differently. You can't see the other saying, oh yeah, well, we'll just wait 6 months until they're done with the nest and then come back and get the rest of the paper.
So the other asks how the shoes are, and he says, excellent, I said. Brilliant, thank you. But what I value even more than the shoes themselves is the proof they give of our friendship. I consider the possession of such a friend as you to be one of the greatest happinesses of my life. I do my best, said the other. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, this is such an unhealthy relationship dynamic.
Oh, man. So he asked for his notes, and he reads them to him, or he remembered it in his head or whatever.
Yeah, he said he took notes, but he doesn't need them He takes out a star chart, shows him which constellations appeared in the doorway.
Yes, and he calls the constellations Rose, the Good Mother, and the Lamppost, the Shoemaker, and the Iron Snake. So these are names he's come up with himself. Let's see. This star here, it forms part of the Good Mother. It is the tip of her extended arm, so to speak. It is one of the brightest stars in the sky. So he did what the other wanted. But instead of thanking him profusely, which a normal person would, he says, This information you've brought me is invaluable. And what I need you to do now is to go back there and establish what constellations can be seen at different times of year. And that's what gets him on, we should stop this and, do real work. He doesn't want the great and secret knowledge.
Yeah.
So what did you make of this? He's like, oh, God, not this again. It's almost like every time this comes up, because it's happened multiple times, you think he's this exasperated and
Well, this is not a guy with a lot of grace or patience, right? So I don't think he's but I do think this level of exasperation is if we believe him, because he keeps having to do this. Every so often. And you can tell that he's testing something about his memory. We talked last time about how he's bringing up words like Battersea to see what he remembered and what he didn't. He knows that he remembers more than Piranesi does. He knows that he has a lot of information that he is actively withholding from. So I don't know that I trust anything the other says, but I do think that the other would be very annoyed if this has happened multiple times, right? So if he keeps having to have this argument about a thing which seems self-evident to him, that they should be going after this knowledge, and also that he should just be doing what he says anyways, regardless of whether it makes sense to him, right? Your memory's spotty. I set the goals because I'm the one who can think clearly.
Yeah. He does something that abusers do, which is, hey, if you're not going to work with me on this, I'll just not come around.
Yeah. If we're no longer colleagues, then I can't see you at all. I can't spend any time with you, person alone in this weird, mysterious, vast place. Who talks to dead people's bones because he wants connection that much. If we're not colleagues, if you don't do what I say, we're not colleagues. And if we're not colleagues, then I can't waste any time on you.
And apparently they have this conversation every 18 months.
Yes, which gives us a timeline for how long this has been. He's been here possibly, or how long they've been working together, because if it's happened 3 times and it happens about every 18 months, then that gives us an idea of how long they've been here.
Is that 4.5 years?
Yeah, it's in the neighborhood of my on-the-fly math is not great, but...
Let's see. You never forget anything about the labyrinth. That is why your contribution to my work is so valuable, but you do forget other things. And, of course, you lose time. This was interesting. Do you think the house just doesn't care about time? It's just, maybe it exists in all times or something?
Yeah, time does not seem to be terribly important to the house. Systems do, right? But not necessarily, because tides and stuff have regular patterns they follow. They have seasons. That kind of stuff, rhythms, patterns, seasons seem to be important to the house. But time doesn't seem to be important to the house.
Yeah, and that must be frustrating for a guy that only comes for an hour, 2 days a week.
Yeah. To whom time is clearly a very big deal.
Yes. You get the sense this guy's real busy.
Or at least he thinks he is.
Well, and our boy Piranesi just thinks he hides out somewhere in the house. He has no conception of where the guy goes. And it's almost like he's in denial. He doesn't want to ask.
Well, the fact that, yes, he's this curious and meticulous about so many things, but he's never, followed the other back to where he lives. They've never shared like meals or fires or resources, you know? He's never tried to... if he thinks that the other is so much more incompetent than him and that's why the house is giving him all this stuff, like he's never tried to check out and make sure that he's okay? You know? It's, it is like things are being actively... Again, because like we talked about, he has knowledge from the outside. Or whatever was before the quote-unquote real world or whatever. Because he knows what Christmas is. He knows what an infection is.
Yes.
But he also doesn't seem to have any... It is like there's a kind of brain damage that you can get that erases all of your personal memory, but not all of your, like, acquired information. So you know things like what a stoplight is, but you don't know who you are.
Right.
You might even know, like, how to drive and road rules and stuff, because all the information that your brain has accumulated, you keep, but personal memories, identity stuff is kept in a different part of your brain, and so, like, you can have damage that only affects one of those.
It seems awfully convenient for the house to, like, edit all kinds of stuff that would make him want to leave.
Oh, it definitely seems intentional, what he can and can't remember.
Doesn't that suggest that the house has sentience?
Or something. Like, we don't know that the other isn't actively doing something to him. We don't know what's the house. We don't know what's, at this point, directed by whom, right? Is he an experiment?
The other is trying to get the great and secret knowledge so he can mentally dominate someone.
Yes.
But maybe he already knows how to edit memories?
I mean, is Piranesi a lab rat? Like, the other comes and he goes for a precise set of time, right? He controls conditions and, you know, to make experiments, like, trackable data, you have to control all of the conditions to make them as uniform as possible.
Oh, do you think that's why he only stays an hour?
I mean, it could be one of the reasons why he only stays an hour. If you're trying to see the effects of something on a subject, you want to keep the data uniform, and you want to influence it as little as possible. Although he's influencing a lot, if that is what's happening, right? Because he's sending him on missions and giving him jobs and stuff, which would be wildly influencing. But those could possibly be controlled experiments that they're trying to see results of different kinds of stimuli.
It could also be that he's seen Piranesi forget something after an hour of having heard it.
Right, so he figures...
So he doesn't want to risk it, maybe?
That there's a chance that he won't remember the beginning of a conversation if it goes past an hour.
Yeah. Oh, and this is where Piranesi goes over to the little shining device. Or no, the other picks it up or examines it anyway. That must be how he sees what time it is. And Piranesi doesn't go like, hey, I wonder what's going on that pad. Every time that happens, I'm just like, this guy it's like he wants to stay here.
Either he does or something else wants him to. Like you said, it's the house or it's him or it's some other force. Because it is, like you mentioned last time, like the robots in Westworld when they see something that's not of Westworld, their brains just don't register it. He does not seem to want to register anything that is. So whether that's what the house wants him to be able to understand, what he wants to be able to understand, or what some other force wants him to be able to understand.
Do you think that would apply to people as well? Like if 16 came around, would Piranesi forget about them as soon as they left?
I mean, I think it's definitely possible. We don't know what, what the objective is of either his own brain, the house, or anything else, like what it would choose to edit or not, and at what point what would become too overwhelming for his brain to be able to continue to edit out, right?
Man. Just thinking about losing memories is like scary.
Terrifying, yeah.
Yeah, like, because you don't know what you don't know.
Right, you'd never be able to know what you're forgetting if you're forgetting something.
Yeah. Oh, man. It's one of those things that when it comes up in a story, it just, like, sometimes I'll, like, get real meta and I'll be like, what if I'm in a simulation or I forgot all this or whatever? This book does it to me every other page. So the next part starts with the world, so far as I can tell, does not bear out the other's claim that there are gaps in my memory. Like, he's just like, nah, I don't buy it.
And this is where, either the house or whatever trying to protect him from not knowing what he doesn't know, he decides that the way to figure that out would be to reread all of his journals. But then decides that it's too big of a task to undertake right now, and he's gonna do it, but he's gotta do it sometime in the future when he has less stuff to do.
Let's see, after that, I write a letter. Dear Other. So where does he write this? He leaves it on the ground for the other to read?
Where they meet, because they meet in the same place. So he chalks it on the stone in the place where they normally meet.
But like in the very next section, the other doesn't bring it up, right? Like,
well, I mean, this is, again, we have no way of knowing if the other is going to be in that space at all between the time when he wrote it and they meet again, God. If it gets washed off the wall by...
Yep.
We have no idea.
And then the other drops the bomb that there is another person. And Piranesi is like, what is it? Is it one of the dead? Guy's like, oh, stop with that. And then he's like, don't talk to the guy. So, and this is another common thing.
Hide from him if you see him.
Yeah, like, don't tell anyone anything because they might tell you stuff, and then you'll know that I'm an asshole.
I'm keeping things from you, or you're both my experimental test subjects, and so I don't want you to know about each other.
Oh, no.
Or trust each other, or figure out what's going on.
Yeah. Piranesi's like, my point is that 16 has information about the world that we do not, and therefore, and the other's like, no, leave it alone. 16 is my enemy, and so by extension, yours too. And that's crushing for Piranesi that, like, because,
there's a whole other human being in the house, and he's not allowed to talk to them? Yeah, I think that would be crushing for basically anybody. I definitely wouldn't listen to somebody telling me there's one other person in the whole world, and you're not allowed to talk to them.
Man.
Like, but I am clearly much more instinctually rebellious than Piranesi. Because I would not have put up with a lot of the things that the other is telling him to do.
I just thought of an uncharitable reading, which was that, like, this is like the film paper, like, if you overemphasize your domestic concerns and religion, it's easy to control you. Whereas if you challenge the person and demand answers, you have to give up some of that, like, veneration. Like, he still thinks the other's really cool, even though the other is being a complete jerk.
Yeah.
He has no credibility. Like, maybe 16 is awesome, but he's fully bought into this guy. Man. Oh, here's the thing that people do a lot when they're assholes. Reason is one of the things that 16 wants to tear down. And then a little later on, I was shocked by the description of 16's wickedness. To be opposed to reason itself? It's total straw man argument. Like, surely nobody's opposed to reason.
I mean, there are people who are opposed to reason. There are absolutely people who are opposed to reason. Surely nobody's
Touché.
opposed to reason. Like, come on. But it is definitely, and again, we don't know if this is what the other really thinks or if this is what he knows will work with Piranesi, right? Because, like,
exactly, playing him like a fiddle. Oh man. And the guy just lets slip, and Piranesi's like, you have visited the far-off places where 16 lives? You never said so before. Tell me about them. Well,
I will say that this is Piranesi jumping to conclusions, because he never says where he lives. Piranesi just assumes if there's a 16th person and he hasn't seen him, he has to live in some far-off place that's distant from any place he's been.
Yes.
So, the other doesn't say that he lives in the far-off place that I've been there. Piranesi's just like, wait, if you've seen this dude and I haven't seen this dude, and I thought you didn't go very far, but you have to have gone far if you've seen somebody who I haven't seen.
The other looked blank and slightly horrified. A long silence. Actually, like, that's another thing. When you drop some truth on an asshole, like, the wheels turn and they change the subject.
Yep, they have to cover that lie or figure out, yeah.
And then he's like, oh, I got to look at the time. I got to go. Oh, Jesus. This guy is such a jerk.
He's such a jerk. Really don't like the other.
The next section, I update my information about 16. The 16th person resides in a far-off region of the house, possibly in the north or south. I have never seen him, but the other reports that he is a malevolent person, hostile to reason, science, and happiness. The other believes that 16 may attempt to come here in order to disrupt our peaceful existence, and he has warned me that if I should ever see 16 in these halls, I should hide myself.
You're definitely right about this being a classic abuser move, both isolating you from other people and also if somebody else knows that he is actively doing something to Piranesi, he wants to put him in a state where he is unlikely to believe anything that they say, right? He wants to prejudice him against them so that he won't accept any information they give him. Their whole point is trying to give him information he should know or would help him.
Fucking other. So now I think, he doesn't say it explicitly, but I think his interest is piqued. And he's like, he didn't say that he goes to far-off regions, but he's clearly going to far-off regions.
He's clearly going to places that I don't know about if he's, yeah.
So I'm going to go to his spot and see what's going on there. The first vestibule.
And this is also interesting that he implies that he's named this place the first vestibule, even though he doesn't go there a lot, and he doesn't start from there, but it's the place that he originally started from, like, and he's like, why is that? Why did I call this place the first vestibule? And it's like, I don't know, maybe it's where you showed up here originally, and that's why it's the first?
Yes. And he mentioned that there was Minotaur on the paper.
Mm-hmm. And there are Minotaurs in the first vestibule.
We got 2 Minotaurs. And at this point, does he see a portal?
So, I mean, it definitely sounds like and this is where the experiment thing could come in, because, like, he sees a corridor, basically. Like, this place smells, it has a draft coming from somewhere he doesn't know. It smells different than anywhere else in the house. And he sees between the 2 statues of Minotaurs, he says it's an optical illusion, but what looks like a long corridor with a light at the end, formed by the shadows. And then he hears a conversation.
You have to be fucking joking, mate. People have no shame. I mean, what goes through their heads when ... The footsteps died away. So what do we got? Like some workmen? Or
this definitely sounds like co-workers, people at a facility, people who've had a long day. And they're like walking down a corridor, talking about stuff.
This would be like if you woke up in the middle of the night in your bedroom and you saw a weird light and there was a UFO out on the sidewalk and these 2 grays were like smoking and bullshitting about, like, you know, the time clock or something.
Yeah,
like,
it definitely has some X-Files vibes like that. It also reminded me of Cabin in the Woods.
Yes.
Where it's things like a creepy cabin in the woods or a school in Japan, but underneath it is like a facility of people running a corporate sacrifice structure.
Let's see. So we learned that he's found crisp packets along the pavement.
And we found out that this room, he's found a bunch of trash in the past.
old fish finger packets and sausage roll wrappings.
Again, it's all very British.
He gathers up and burns the garbage so they don't mar the beauty of the house. Do you think the other just assumes that he's cleaning, or does he think that the house cleans itself?
I do not think the other gives a shit about what happens to his fish finger wrappers. I think the other is the kind of person who, what happens to his trash once he discards it is never even like a thought in his head.
Okay. This note is nuts.
Yes.
All I am asking you to do is to give me directions to the statue you were telling me about, the one of an elderly fox teaching some young squirrels and other creatures. I would like to see it for myself. This task is not difficult and should be well within your capabilities. Write the directions in the space below. I have left a biro next to your lunch. Eat it while it is hot. The lunch, not the biro. Lawrence. P.S. Please try to remember to take your multivitamin. So with the multivitamin and the statue, I think we can assume that Lawrence is writing to Piranesi, right?
I don't know that I assume that at all. I mean, it could be, but also it could be somebody leaving a note for the other, or the other leaving a note for somebody else. It could be Lawrence leaving a note for Piranesi, but we don't know. There's no indication. There is an indication that somebody knows the geography of the house, which at this point, Piranesi is the person who seems to know that, and he, says oh, I know that statue in his head when he reads the note. But yeah, we don't know that it could definitely be Lawrence is writing to Piranesi, but we don't know who's writing to who.
Oh, and so if Lawrence was still alive and waiting for the information about the statue, then it would be wrong to take the paper. I got out my own pen and wrote the following in the empty space. So he explains the statue and where to find it. And then he puts in some personal stuff. If you are one of my own dead, and if your spirit passes through this vestibule and reads this paper, then I hope you already know that I visit your niche or plinth regularly to talk with you and bring you offerings of food and drink.
But I love what he leaves there. He's like, A, I hope you're still alive and you find this and it's helpful. But if not, B, and you're one of the dead people I already know, let me know, because I'd like to know which dead person I'm talking to. I can use your name, Lawrence, at your bones then. Or, are you a dead person I haven't met yet? In which case, let me know where you're at, and I will honor you like I honor all the other dead people.
It's amazing. May the house in its beauty shelter us both. Your friend.
And what is interesting is that he has just been told about another person who's dangerous and he doesn't know, and then he finds a note with a name on it of somebody he doesn't have any connection to somebody of that name, and yet he does not automatically assume or make any connection between 16 and Lawrence.
Right. He automatically discounts it, right? He's pretty sure it's not. What does he say? Who? I considered and immediately discounted the possibility that either of them was 16. The other had said that 16 did not know the way here, and clearly both Lawrence and his friend had been familiar with these halls at one time. Does that make sense?
I mean, it does, but also I don't remember the other saying that he didn't know his way around. Is this Piranesi jumping to conclusions, or did the other imply that he doesn't know? Because I don't remember the other saying anything about what 16 did or didn't know, just that he was a violent and scary person and you should stay away from him.
Yeah. Listener, if you know if we missed something, let us know. Send a email to... So that's it for the other. What do you think? Any big thoughts?
I think the other's an asshole, as previously stated. Whatever's going on with him, whatever level of benevolence, I can't stand this dude.
He's such a bastard.
But I definitely think this section leaves a lot more implications that, like I said, to me, my brain kept going to, like, is this an experiment? Is this, because I thought about Cabin in the Woods with that corridor, and dudes definitely seeming like they were at work, and, like, the other definitely seeming like he has a full closet and a shower somewhere. So is he fully leaving the house every day? Like, is this an exploration mission into some weird dimension or something, and he just goes home every day from, like...
What makes Piranesi not go down the corridor?
Again, this is like his brain editing thing, because he automatically dismisses it as anything but an optical illusion, even though he's seeing a corridor, he's smelling stuff coming from the corridor, and he's hearing a conversation coming from the corridor, and yet he's saying, like, it's not actually a corridor, like, it's an optical illusion. He doesn't even try, like, he doesn't step into it at all, which would be definitely an instinct that I would have in a similar situation.
Ooh, I had a wild thought. What if he's always been here, like he was a wolf child or whatever, grew up in the house, and the other is studying him? Oh, but that's belied by the fact that we know his journals go back to
yes, and he used to reference like our timeline and stuff like Battersea. So I think it's much more likely that Piranesi was, if there was some sort of expedition or research or like Stargate style, we're checking out a, portal or something like other, that he was maybe a part of the original research team, and then he spent so much time in there that whatever happened to his brain, and they've just left him in there. Maybe the other is the only one who knows that he's even still alive.
Gotta be. I mean, now this sends me on a whole other road, like, how does somebody just disappear?
I mean, the house is vast and unchartable. They're trying to figure it out. And if there was a research team, somebody got lost and didn't report back for weeks, then they might have just said, like, guess that guy's gone.
I mean, on the outside, like the other... Normally, if one of your people disappears, that's it for your study. Like,
unless you're keeping it a secret that one of your people disappeared.
If your study is magic, nobody's going to believe you. So you're just going to be the last person that saw a guy alive. That's uncomfortable. Yeah.
I mean, maybe they were like research partners and Piranesi just disappeared and like he just like got reported as a missing persons or whatever, and all the time the other was like, yeah, no, I don't know what happened to that dude. The whole time all he knows he's living in the house.
Oh, and with those two people talking that he's never heard or met, that would suggest that either they don't know about it or they're not allowed to go through the corridor.
Maybe. I mean, it could be like, yeah, like if this was like, take Stargate, for example. That's a secret military installation. There's a group of researchers who know about it, but that's a whole military installation that has other stuff going on, and if you didn't have clearance to go in that room where they're working on the Stargate, you would just be like, yeah, so my shift's over at 10 and then I gotta go. Because you're just working at a...
Now I'm just imagining a military installation where they just send a guy through the Stargate every couple days. And they're like, what are you doing in there? Studying magic. That's fine. Go home. Like...
But I mean, it's only magic from our perspective right now, right? Like, we don't know what it would be from the perspective of, like, it could be science from their... It could be like, oh, we've got this ability to open a portal into a parallel universe or something, but we're trying to check it out and we don't know. The great and secret knowledge thing does imply that it's like information that was lost, because that's one of his arguments to Piranesi, right? When he wants to give up the quest for it, is that this isn't just for us, this is for humanity, and it's a thing that humanity used to have access to but doesn't anymore. So there's definitely some mystical sounding implications to that, but it could also be like a technology that we had and then lost, or, that he's trying to find. So how this is being pitched to the outside world might not be magic. If this is you know.
I'd love to see his records. If he's continuing to pretend this is science,
his grant
I'd love
proposals.
To see, yeah, I'd love to see all that.
What do his grant proposals look like? It would be really interesting.
I'm just picturing his lab as just like liquor bottles and cigars and like an armchair.
Apparently lots of sausage rolls and fish fingers.
Yep. What if he's just a guy that works in this building? What if it's like a 7.5 floor thing, like from being John Malkovich, where like he's just the only one that knows this magic door exists, but otherwise he's just a random plebe at this office?
Yeah.
That'd be fun.
Yeah. There's a lot of possibilities at this juncture for what's going on.
But that would suggest that he'd have to tell them like, hey, I'm going to go to my secret office for an hour. Don't come find me. Like, what if there was a fire drill and he was in the house?
I mean, there's lots of people, I don't know where you work, but like lots of people who do not constantly keep tabs on where everybody is and what everybody's doing at work. If there was a fire drill and he don't show up, I just think people would assume that he was like out to lunch or something, or had gone home early that day, or...
Yeah, our last fire drill, the supervisor made a pretend showing that she was counting everybody, but I don't think she really was.
I don't think I've ever actually had a fire drill happen anywhere where I was.
I guess this wasn't a drill, it was a real thing, I think.
It was a real fire.
No, but there was no fire.
Emergency evacuation? Maybe
it was a drill, yeah. I'm sorry, this is not interesting. Cut. But yeah, like they don't keep track of us. I don't know, maybe they would in a real fire situation. Okay, so now I'm going to pretend that it's Lawrence and he is a middle manager at this random company. And he eats his lunch in a secret room.
That is actually a secret universe.
I bet he's not married, because a partner would be like, I tried calling you for an hour. You were incommunicado. What's going on here? Don't call me at work. Maybe he's a total asshole to his partner.
I was going to say, he seems to definitely be like a narcissist, so I'm assuming any relationship that he is in is not a healthy one with open communication, so...
That's a safe bet.
He seems to like to play a lot of power games and control a lot of information over people he interacts with, so.
He sure does. Okay, part 3 is called The Prophet. Got any guesses who the prophet might be?
16.
That's interesting, because the chapter after that is called 16. What if Piranesi is the prophet?
Piranesi could be the prophet. He's definitely the most spiritual person we've come into contact with in this book.
Yeah, like maybe he's like, I've seen a vision. There's a corridor. I got to preach to the dead. You know, I got a new
He has already gotten a revelation. And in this section we read, talked about like a knowledge coming from afar, a message with obscure knowledge. Although I do think that was the note. But...
yes, of course. But yeah, the birds, the conversation that we started today with.
Yep.
Yeah.
But that could also mean a prophecy. Like, you know, we don't have any confirmation that what the birds were trying to tell him about was the note. That he receives a vision. We don't know. But I think the prophet is probably 16.
And that would imply that Piranesi talks to them.
Yes.
Because otherwise, why would they talk? How do you find out someone's a prophet? Because they won't shut up about it.
All those prophets. Never let you forget it.
That's right. It's all Israel has failed the Lord and, you know, can't catch a break. I think that's... my prediction?
Yeah.
Yeah. It'd be fun if there was a fourth person.
Well, we don't know that Lawrence isn't a fourth person. Lawrence could be the prophet. We don't know who Lawrence is.
Oh my God. Lawrence just wants to fuck with the project. He just wants to fuck with the other. So every once in a while he sneaks in a robe with like a fake beard.
And declaims a prophecy to
Piranesi. There will be a man in a suit. He's a total dick. Don't do what he says. But I think it has to be Piranesi because the house is God, right? Mm-hmm. So the prophet of the house would be somebody that cares about the house.
And is in tune with the house. And obviously the other is not in tune with the house.
Yeah. Well, we'll find out next time, folks. Stay tuned. Coming back at you with part 3, The Prophet. We might cut that in half. I'll find out how long that is.
Yeah, how long that section is.
And yeah. Thank you for joining me once again as we plumb the depths for that great and secret knowledge.
Yep.
Thanks, listener. We'll see you very soon. 2 weeks, something like that.
Yeah, next time.
All right. Peace.
I'm going to die buried under all my books someday because it's already almost happened twice. My room is filled with 6 bookcases, and I just can't give up how much I love physical books. You know, Kindles and stuff are great for when you're traveling and you don't want to carry a bunch of books. But yeah, no, once when I was a kid, the Northridge earthquake, I don't know if you heard about that I wasn't home in bed because if I had been, the biggest bookcase fell right across my bed.
Oh my God. And
then just last year, I had 2 stackable bookcases. One that was on top of, they were designed to be stacked. They were like Target wood bookcases that you're designed to be stacked and modular. But the one on the bottom, I had weighted them down so heavily, and the one on the bottom cracked, and the one on the top fell off and fell over my legs while I was asleep. It was like 3 a.m. And I totally freaked out for a second. So someday the books are coming for me. They've already tried to bury me twice, and someday they will succeed. But I can't give up my love for physical books.
That's wild. Like, I think I'm going to die by getting hit by a car. You're going to be crushed by books.
Well, it does remind me for all of our C.S. Lewis talk last time about he was really afraid of a flood. He always had these nightmares about a flood, and he thought that either he died of a flood in a past life or it was his destiny to die in a flood. That's why in the end of the Chronicles of Narnia, the whole world is destroyed by a flood.
Oh, that's fun.
Which also obviously has Bible implications, like we talked about. But yeah, for me, it's the books. The books are going to have for however much I love them, and I feel like they love me back. But someday they're going to bury me.
Dastardly.
Maybe an unhealthy codependency that they're going to suffocate me someday.
Well, hopefully we'll get a few good podcasts in before then.
Before that? I think we've got a good long while before the books bury me. Well, my goal that I always stated was that by the time, because people are always like, you should get rid of the books you've read or whatever. And first of all, I'm a big rereader. If I like a book, I reread it.
That's heresy. I'll only get rid of a book if I know I don't need it
if
anymore.
I know that I have no interest in ever reading it again. But the goal is also to, by the time I can afford to build my 2-story Gothic library in my house, I want to have enough books to fill my 2-story Gothic library. So
there you go.
How am I going to do that if I get rid of them?
That's right. You'd have to fill them in with cardboard mock-ups. That's no fun.
No. My 2-story Gothic library will have actual books. So
are you gonna leave the covers on? I take the dust jacket off immediately when I get a book.
I mean, I've thought about getting them all recovered, possibly. Because what people used to do back in the day when books were an incredible sign of wealth and owned by only, and they were all handmade, is you'd buy the books with just this part. It would just be and then you would take them to a place that did bookbinding, because they would all be color-coded to whatever you wanted your library books to be like. So they would all be red Rococo, or they would all be hunter green, because it was for the aesthetics of your personal library. So books wouldn't come with the fancy leather covers that you see in old books. You would take them to a second shop. A lot of times that was attached to the first one. And you would personalize it for presents or whatever, too. You would give somebody, this book of Keats poems, and I wanted to have a purple cover with gold inlay, as like a present for them or whatever. But I have thought about, finding a bookbinder, because there are still a couple around, and just having them take all of my like cheap
that's a great idea.
But it'd still be my books that have been with me forever, but then with very fancy hand-done leather covers on all of them.
That's marvelous.
If I can afford my 2-story Gothic library, I can afford to employ a bookbinder for like 5 years to just cover all of my books.
Yeah, when I would sometimes sit around and fantasize about winning the lotto, it would, and I never play, so it would never happen. But I want the library from Beauty and the Beast with the like huge window.
That is what I mean by 2-story Gothic, in the sense that Gothic, not the Rococo style that the Beauty and the Beast library is in with all that built, but with the 2 stories where the second is like a wraparound balcony, and there's like a spiral staircase in the corner that takes you up to the second level of the book. So you've got this huge ceiling, big ass fireplace at one end, big windows on the other, and then like your 2 floors worth of books that are, the one is a balcony level around it's my dream.
Sounds awesome.
Yep.
There's one of those in the last season of Discovery. It's like a whole space station that's a library.
Ooh. That's like the Doctor Who episode where the whole planet's a library.
Oh, yes.
It's a library.
Who turned out the lights? I think I might go watch that.
Right now?
So good.
The first introduction of River Song.
Oh, God. Vashta Narada.
Mm-hmm. It always reminded me of that X-Files episode, because there's that X-Files episode with those bugs that can only swarm you if you're in the dark.
Oh. I wonder if Moffat lifted that from
I don't know, because
X-Files.
it definitely predates that Doctor Who episode, because it was from like the 90s, that episode. And it was similar that the bugs were everywhere at this place, but they could only swarm and devour you if it was dark. So they had to stay in the light in that X-Files episode as well.
That's always fun when you find other stories that Doctor Who has like lifted bits from.
Well, since it's been on the air in some form since the 60s, it basically does have to rip off everybody's plot at some point. Although there is also just that thing that like sci-fi fantasy shows have certain plot tropes that have to happen. Like there's always the repeating day episode. There's always the body swap episode. There's always there's like those kinds of episodes that just everybody does a version of if you're a supernatural sci-fi show.
Oh man. Yeah, the bottle episode where something's killing you one by one.
The Thing. Basically, everybody does the Thing episode.
The Thing, yeah.
The Who Can I Trust? We're getting picked off one at a time.
Yeah, so I started reading sci-fi books like because a friend was doing a blog where they reviewed and they wrote an essay about each Hugo Award winner starting at the very beginning, and they sort of ran out of steam at a certain point. But I was like, well, I'm just going to do it. So I did it. And then I did all the Nebula winners. And then I went back and filled in gaps here and there, like the nominees and stuff.
Wow.
And yeah, I keep finding like little Doctor Who sort of stories in there. Like sometimes it came before, sometimes after.
Sometimes it came after, yeah.
They might have had the same influence. Like it's a lot of fun.
I do feel like that's a case with X-Files because because it was so long running and it was the Monster of the Week thing, although it had like the lore episodes, but it had a lot of monster that they borrowed from a lot of or took inspiration from a lot of sci-fi like short story collections, but also like Twilight Zones and that kind of stuff. And then there's lots of people who've repeated a bunch of those, so they could have they could be borrowing or inspired by the X-Files episodes, but they could be also inspired by or borrowing from whatever the X-Files was, and stuff like that. But when something's been on the air as long as Doctor Who, you definitely expect that there's people keeping an eye out for a good plot and something else.
Yeah, there's a trope that they did in Enemy of the World in like 1967 or something, which is a group of people are told that the end of the world has happened and they're in like a bunker somewhere.
Yeah, no, the bunker episode is definitely one of those tropes that comes up.
And it's like, and that happens in Invasion of the Dinosaurs as well. It's slightly different, but like I came across that somewhere else and I was like, I remember that story idea. That's so much fun. It's just totally bananas. But I guess that's really similar to Piranesi, except it's a group of people. Mm-hmm. And here it's just one person. The vault in Fallout is kind of like that.
Yeah. No, there's lots of stuff that have that bunker.
Oh, except that it actually was the end of the world.
It actually was, yeah, but sometimes they are. But that episode doesn't necessarily... Sometimes it's about paranoia, and sometimes it's about the way that people, like, try and... the psychological response to that. And sometimes it's about the paranoia of, like... Because, you know, there's stuff like, again, Twilight Zone... the monsters are due on Maple Street, or there's like several Twilight Zone episodes that have a version of the bunker episode. But yeah, it's like, if we trap you all here and then we have weird stuff happening, what are you all gonna do?
Oh man, isn't that the one where like the townsfolk start to like point fingers,
turn on each other? Yeah,
and the aliens are just up there.
Yeah, doing experiments on us because they think that they're being invaded, but then they'll start doing things like everybody's power goes off and then one person's house still has power, so everybody else on the street is like, why do the Robinsons still have power, you know?
Okay, I'm gonna take a note. Let's remember to bring up that idea. Other stories about people being experimented on or tricked.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned Cabin in the Woods.
Cabin in the Woods definitely kept coming to mind in this section. So,
yeah, it's interesting because, like, as far as we know, scientists don't do that with like mice. You know, try to keep them in the dark and don't tell them stuff.
I mean, they do
because they don't speak English, right?
But they still do control group stuff with animals, where they try not to like let them know about the case of the experiment and stuff. Sorry, I've got a dessert here that's been staring at me, so I'm gonna...
Oh, yes, please. Yeah, we don't have to keep going. I just wanted to...
No. It's just been tempting me the whole episode, and I was like, I have to take a bite. I just got a fruit tart right here, and I'm like...
that sounds good.
It was really good. But, yeah, I mean, sometimes even with animals, you don't want them to know what's happening before it happens, or... be able to compare notes, because animals can compare notes even if they can't speak English.
Yes. Oh man. Yeah, it really is hard to control somebody for long.
Yeah.
So like in these stories where they do it, like it's fascinating to see how they get around all that. Because people we're rebellious by nature, I think. We don't like to be confined.
Well, we're definitely inquisitive by nature, and yeah. There's a part of us that is all about fitting in. We're small group primates. So social relationships are really important to us, and feeling like we fit in to the social order. So much of our behavior is about that kind of stuff. Like, the way that we greet each other, right, is all about establishing whether you're in my in-group or not. I studied anthropology, so this is stuff that I could go off on for a really long time.
That's
but
great.
Stuff like, you know, I, as somebody who is not, have been a little socially odd my whole life and stuff, when people would ask me, like, how are you doing? There's, like, a lot of times I'll reply with something like, is this a genuine inquiry or, like, social ritual? Because, like, I can reply back to you. I can let you know we're in the same in-group. I can say, oh, I'm good, thanks, how are you? Or I can tell you the actual answer, which I'm not saying is good or bad or anything, but it's very different than me just, like, doing the ritual, right? Like, responding to let you know that I'm in the same in-group as you.
Oh, man.
It's why we do stuff like yawn when we see other people yawn.
Yeah.
And the reason why sociopaths don't yawn when they see other people yawn. Because that part of their brain that feels empathy and also cares about, like, social networking isn't autonomic. They have to think about it. It doesn't just happen for them. So they can learn that they're supposed to yawn and yawn when they see you yawn, but they don't have, like, a physiological yawn response to seeing you yawn because they don't have the empathy.
Sometimes I wish I could go back to the like people that I think might be sociopaths and yawn and see what happens.
Yawn around them? Well, they're 10% of the population.
Holy shit.
So you've definitely met one. It would be.
Oh, I know that. I
It would
just
be
never
super
tried the test.
statistically anomalous for you to have never encountered one, but it's possible. But there's a thing I talk about that they're actually really, like, psychopaths don't tend to be violent unless violence is modeled for them as a solution to problems, right? So they don't inherently have empathy, but them being serial killers and stuff usually only happens when, like, violence was modeled for them in their upbringing. If you were a person who grew up in, like, a fine home, but you are a psychopath, you don't have the part of your brain that registers and develops empathy. But this is one of the things where a lot of psychopaths become CEOs, surgeons, and law enforcement. And a surgeon is actually, you kind of want a psychopath to be your surgeon, because the biggest, they're very egotistical, right? Like, there's a lot of overlap of narcissistic personality disorder with psychopathy. They care a lot about themselves and their self-image, so they do a really good job because they care about how they're perceived and their status and stuff. But they don't feel any sympathy for you or empathy for you, so they don't have any hesitation about cutting into you, which actually tends to make them really good surgeons, because hesitation cuts are some of the biggest problems in, like, surgery. So having a surgeon who cares a lot about doing a good job but doesn't necessarily care about you personally can actually be sort of an ideal surgeon situation.
Yeah. Oh boy.
There's a really fascinating book called The Psychopath Test that I highly recommend. It's Jonathan Ronson, who's, like, an investigative journalist. He writes a lot of nonfiction books where he gets really interested in a topic and studies it. And he basically got really interested in the test that we use to evaluate people's levels of psychopathy, particularly in stuff like the prison system and whatever. Like, if you're up for parole, you'll get one of these, like, an official test administrator will come in and give you this test, because they found that the recidivism rates for psychopaths is much higher and stuff, right? But he found out about this test, and then he got really obsessed with how it was created, who created it, what are the criteria, what are the people who do. So it's a really fun and fascinating read. There's one part that I really like where he's basically like, look, if you're going to read this book, you're going to get to the point where you start asking, am I a psychopath? Because doing the research for this, I definitely did. And I'm going to tell you right now what all the experts told me, which is basically, if you are interested enough to ask the question, you aren't a psychopath. Like, if you are self-inquisitive enough and also, like, humble enough to ask if you're a psychopath, you're not. A psychopath does not care whether they're a psychopath or not. They aren't inquisitive enough about it to ask the question. So basically, if you're wondering if you're a psychopath, it's immediately disqualifying for being one.
I remember somebody in an argument said I was, like, in front of people too, and I was like, that's patently absurd. But then after the fight, I was like, but I would think that if I Ugh. Special thanks to Amy Ashton for doing our logo. Amy is great. Check her out. Her newest art book is wonderful. And also, our music is royalty free. It's from the Library of Congress. Song of the Volga Boatman. The Great and Secret Knowledge. It's going to be a long email address. Tagask at such and such.